The great leaders are not rich, they enrich. They enrich others' lives. Even though they sound the same, are two entirely different things, right? Until a leader recognizes that they are not here to be served, but to serve, they're not going to be successful.
Hi, welcome back to ReedFlections, a podcast on life, leadership, and learning. I'm Art Calderon. I'm here with Reed Nyffeler. Reed is a CEO, a father, a husband, a local leader here in the heartland of America, and we are moving along in our podcast journey. A brief recap, folks. Episodes 1 through 4 was all about priorities. Then we moved into habits, knowing your purpose or know your purpose, start your journey, be present on purpose. We are entering our last section of Season 1. The last 4 episodes, 25 through 28, and it is a legacy of purpose. We're thinking to the future for a legacy. And currently, episode 25, if you can believe it, that is a lot of episodes. And today we're talking about invest in others. Reed, tell me what this means. What is this phrase, a legacy of purpose?
Yeah, I think there's really 2 things I want to cover kind of as we start. First of all, when we think of a legacy, that is how we're remembered when we're done, right? And so if you attend a funeral and all the things that are boiled down are the legacy that'll be remembered, and then you fast forward another 20 years and you say, okay, what do the grandparents tell the next generation about that individual, right? And then ultimately, what do they tell about the generation afterwards? And so it's really the message that's carried forward. And if you really look at that, we have a chance to have our legacy be defined by us or by others. And so if it's after we're dead, right, others are defining what they remember of us, right? But if it's before, while we're still alive, we can invest and be on purpose of how we want to be remembered. And so that's the legacy component of that, is saying, do we do that on purpose? Do we know what we want to be remembered by as we go forward? And that should align with our purpose statement, right? And so we'll be remembered by our purpose statement. And that is our responsibility to live that out, right? So in my case, through intuitive interaction, help propel leaders over their self-imposed barrier to live out their unique purpose in life. Will that be what's communicated at my funeral? And have I done enough of that to justify that? Is that ultimately going to be my legacy? And if that is my legacy, I have done it on purpose, as opposed to by default, which is when people say, survived by XYZ person, and here's their kids, and the legacy becomes more familial than it is by purpose.
So what are some steps you would take to make sure that that legacy lives on after you? That you it's one thing to say, here's what I would like everybody to think about me, but what are some concrete steps you take in order to make sure that actually happens and you do leave a legacy of purpose?
And there's a stated legacy and a lived legacy, right? So many people, when they're young, they have, here's what I want to be when I grow up, right? And we say that, but then do we live that? And so when we die, it is what we live, not what we said. And so that is why it's so critical that our legacy at the end is what we lived. And so the difference is from a priority standpoint, how will I achieve that, right? Am I living with my faith first, as we talked about priorities in the first episode? The second one is, am I focused on my family? And will they see that result? And then ultimately, is productivity, my work, going to be there? And then finally, recreation. And if I look at my legacy and I'm at that funeral, there might be people from all 4 groups. And hopefully by balance, they understood all those 4 things and they're there. And then in that environment, would they say, you know what, Reed was really clear about his eternal vision, right? His transcendent and universal vision. In fact, if you look around the room, it encompasses all of that. And then I saw him operationalize that in his life, right? Whether it was a long-term vision or a 5-year or 1 year. In fact, I remember a moment, right? And that's what we generally talk about there. A moment that we saw that lived, that was transformational, which was a former episode here. So that's a legacy on purpose. At the same time, that's why we're lived. But then how does it get carried forward, right? How does that get carried forward? And so I'll give an example. And there's recipes, and I'm sure just as anybody, you have family recipes.
Sure.
And that recipe can be written on a card and handed out at a wedding, or here's our family recipes, or you're there. But really, where does it carry forward? When it's written on the card?
When it's created.
When it's created, right? When it's lived. When we remember this was grandma's soup and grandma's whatever else, and you did a great job making it. And that's the type of legacy we want to galvanize. It's not just written on a recipe that gets filed out and pulled out, but it becomes a staple that's carried forward at every Thanksgiving. That was grandma's recipe, made grandma's way going forward. And that is their legacy that carries forward in their absence. And we remember it and evoke emotions as a result of those circumstances. So that's a legacy on purpose.
Gotcha. So where is it that you start? You said you talked a little bit about investing in others. Where do you start when you want to invest in somebody in order to help with this legacy that's left after you're gone?
And I've thought a lot about this in a way to, create an analogy that we can understand, right? And so when we think of the word invest, many times we're investing money. And so I thought that's a good place to start, right? And so let's look at a stock, right? And so if we look at a stock and we see a stock that doesn't make any money, we pull our money out. We stop investing, right? If each and every day we wake up and that stock is declining in value, we pull our money out. Right? At the same time, as if it's being highly successful and it's going up and the sky's the limit, we're going to put more money into it. Right? Well, our most risky investment is humans. The other reason it's highly risky is we can't determine the trajectory of that. And so the first step of this is, one, determine you're going to invest. And then number two, make sure you're a good steward of that investment of time. And we invest in others. And so it starts with, okay.
That's what you're talking about. When you say investing in people, it's really your time, right?
It's your time. That's the most precious resource, right? I mean, ultimately a job is exchanging our time for money. So our time is money. We're going to a job and whatever we produce in that period of time generates a revenue for a business and we're getting paid for that time. So time is more valuable than money in that regard. And so then ultimately we need to determine, okay, is this person worth investing in per my purpose statement? So that's my intuitive interaction. Saying, okay, is this person worth investing in? And then propel leaders. Is this person a potential leader? Because if they're not a potential leader, it would not get the same return for me specifically as it would for someone that is a potential leader, right? I don't go and consult the high-performing leaders because I can't really help them in alignment with my purpose, even though they may get multiplication. And sometimes we try to attach ourselves to those leaders and say that we get credit for their performance. But in reality, we're just in perspective. And so I heard Urban Meyer one time, who's the head coach of the Florida Gators at the time, and he had Tim Tebow on his team. And I highly respect Tim Tebow. And he said he was a quarterback and had won multiple national championships with them. And he said, when he was giving this keynote speech, he said, Tim Tebow, I didn't have to invest in him. He was a self-starter. He woke up in the morning, he knew what he wanted to accomplish. He had a game plan, he worked out and everything else. But everybody knew me by him. But ultimately, Tim Tebow was by and large going to be great wherever he went because he just had that disposition. And of course, I was his coach, no different. You can use the example of Michael Jordan too, right? You can use the example of these super high performers, and they happen to have a coach. He said, but the team didn't win the championship because of Tim Tebow, because if Tim Tebow didn't have somebody blocking for him, if Tim Tebow didn't have somebody catching the ball when he threw it, if Tim Tebow didn't have a defense that stopped the other offense, we wouldn't have won. And he said, so that is where I invested my time. I looked at those other people that are insulated around that high performer, and that is the best place as the head coach to invest his time in order to lead to success. And to me, that made sense, saying, okay, I want to attach myself to this high performer and say I contributed to their success, when in reality, the best way to leverage that high performer's ability is to invest in those around him. And that's what I would say if we're discerning. In my case, hey, I can through self-imposed barriers. So maybe there's that lineman in this scenario analogy that says, you know what, I don't get the attention of Tim Tebow, so I'm not worthwhile on this team. So that self-imposed barrier is mental and saying, no, wait a minute, the championship is won by a team. And Tim Tebow's taking the heat from the media. And so just protect him, right? And that's your role. That's your job. That's how you play in this. And that's a self-imposed barrier. And then he can live out unique purpose and he can be excited to win a championship by blocking for Tim Tebow. And that's a way to look at, okay, through your purpose statement, where do I make investments that would ultimately help someone come over their self-imposed barriers so they can live out their unique purpose? And that's how you determine who and when to invest.
Now, because you've seen quite a bit of success in the business world, the company that you head now has grown exponentially over the years. So I know that there's a lot of people who would come to you and say, hey, Reed, can I meet with you? Can I pick your brain? Can you mentor me? Can we meet, 1 hour a week? And how do you know, what do you look for? Because you can't say yes to everybody. That's all you'd be doing. So what do you look for when you say, okay, this person, yes, this person, no, but this person right here's got what I want? What is that thing?
So that's a summary of the intuitive interaction. So one, first thing and most important, I'm looking for character, right? Because character will befall every leader.
Hmm.
You can have responsibility. I mean, we see this politically all the time. I mean, what are they basically trying to do? They're trying to assassinate their character or expose their character in either case. And because that weakens them as a leader, they do not get followers. And so that's the first thing. Because if they're going to, you can mentor someone to be a great thief, right? I mean, you can teach them all the ways of being a thief, but is that the right thing to do? No, it's not.
Because there's some people who are powerful people who have led a lot, who have maybe created businesses and so forth, but their character is questionable, right? And that's
Absolutely.
somebody, even though they had all that talent, you would say, no, because of the character issues, I won't invest in them.
So I'll give an example, right? I mean, Warren Buffett is a prominent Omaha native, and he is worth billions. And so he's now in his 90s, right? And he's needing to pass his legacy along. And there's been countless people that have wanted him to mentor them. And in fact, he had brought some in the organization. And then maybe 10, 15 years back, there was a presumption that one of the people he was developing ultimately made a financial mistake that would have considered a default to Warren's character. And I watched this from afar because here's a guy that literally is, one of his key men, and he had a character slip up, right? He made a decision that ultimately was not in alignment. And so that's why character's first, right? Because even if you have high potential and you need someone to, carry forward your business and investment strategies, character is the first thing. The second part of the intuitive interaction is, can they or do they want to be, and are they willing and able to be a leader? Because that's part of my personal purpose statement. And that might be different for other people, right? But in my particular case is I have to, in order to carry out my unique purpose on this earth, propel leaders. Why? Because I can help a lot of people, right? I mean, I think we all can. And can I help a lot of people propel leaders? And then the characteristics of that particular leader is someone that cares about others, right? And so I give an example. I have this one guy, and I believe he had all leadership capabilities. You would ask him, and if you looked at his life, and he was a young 20-something at the time, and I had hired him as an intern, and he had seen things in me that he wanted to have in himself. And he said he was, and I think he had some leadership characteristics. In fact, he'd worked on some committees and teams and otherwise. But they were all for short durations. And I was sitting there thinking, okay, well, why wasn't that there? Because clearly he could articulate himself well. He had a outgoing personality and, many defined characteristics you'd think of a leader. And then I said, okay, let's schedule a call. And so we scheduled a call. And in that call, we talked through the process. And I said, why would you want me to mentor you? What are you really trying to gain in this process? And he said, well, I want to be rich. And I said,
appreciate the honesty.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's somewhat of a summary, but I want all the material possessions the world has to offer is what he basically was saying in every sense. And I said, well, I'm not going to help you. I said, there's plenty of people that can help you be rich. I said, I want you to enrich. The great leaders are not rich, they enrich. They enrich others' lives, right? Until a leader recognizes that they are not here to be served, but to serve, they're not going to be successful. I will not. And I went through it. So after that first 2 or 3 minutes.
How did he take that?
The next 45 minutes, he was arguing with me that my perception was wrong and he should be invested in. And yet I constantly asked the same question and he could not pivot off of it. And he said he was very upset that I would not invest in him. And I said, this is not my purpose statement. And I have to have alignment in order to make the investment. You are asking for my time, and it comes with this condition that you do not become rich, you enrich. And those, even though they sound the same, are two entirely different things. And he could not and would not get away from that. He said, but the rest of the world, and he lived in a society in his mind and in the world that everyone gave a claim to those who were rich. And the people that enrich were basically the doormat or the people that, were in that behind the scenes, and he did not want to be behind the scenes.
It sounds like his response really just reinforced your decision.
That's exactly right.
Amazing.
And if you have principles and you have processes and you have a conversation, those get validated in their response, right? Meaning afterwards, you're like, that's exactly what I thought he was, hence why I asked the question. And that's why you go through that process. So
that's interesting. Now, there must have been a time when someone did that for you, right? Is there a time when someone looked at a young Reed Nyffeler and said, I'm going to invest in you?
Yeah, and I think sometimes that happens more. You either caught or taught, and I would say it's absolutely more caught in that case. That people said, okay, and I remember, in fact, here was a very specific example. So I was married at 21, young, and I'd been involved in a youth program and then in a college program, and then I had gotten married by a pastor that was at this particular church I happened to attend at the time. And so then we had been married maybe 18, 24 months. I said, I'd like to help. And he said, in fact, I would like you to be the interim youth pastor. I said, we just met. He said, yeah, I know. And I go, you're asking me to do that? We just met. He said, yeah, but I could fire you. I said, okay.
Oh, wow.
I said, well, fair enough. I agree to those terms. And he goes, Reed, I see some potential in you and I can round out the edges. He'd been a pastor for maybe 20, 25 years at this particular church. And I remember, just because it's an aside, which is really funny. And he's like, I'd like to introduce you to the church this weekend as the youth pastor. And I said, well, that's pretty quick. What is today, Monday? Okay. And he goes, have you been baptized? And in this case, I had not at that time. And he goes, well, why don't we, in order to work here, you have to be baptized. And so I'll baptize you and then I'll announce you. I said, okay.
So he baptized you and then announced you as a new youth minister?
While we're still in the it gets better. And so I remember this distinctly. It was in November. And so then we're there and it's Sunday and he's like, are you ready? I'm like, yeah. And so he's like, get your swim trunks on and whatever else. And so I'm standing in the water and he's like, right before we get in, he goes like, the heater's broken. And I go over to him. I said, he was wearing waders. I go, you got another pair? He's like, shook his head no. And I was like, oh boy.
Okay.
And so sure enough, we get in there and I was the only person being baptized that day. He dunks me. And then come up and, you go into cold water. I mean, we're talking November.
Yeah.
It's really cold water. And then he wanted to talk for like 5 to 7 minutes about how I was going to be the youth pastor. And so, I mean, that's a time where he invested in me and evidently he thought I had more thermal protection than I did or something. I don't know. But ultimately, that was the beginning. And I remember distinctly saying, this guy, as he's talking in front of the church, who had just met me a week and a half to 2 weeks, was literally communicating on my potential and how he was going to come alongside me and develop. And, even though that was about an 8 or 9 month period of time, I distinctly was developed in that area. And I think many things developed as a result. I mean, I think I can publicly speak to a greater degree now. I can obviously understand all sorts of different walks of life. That role, you're dealing with the parents, you're dealing with the children, you're dealing with their emotions, you're dealing with what they will or will not communicate. And of course, as a franchisor, all those skills, come to benefit because you see all different walks of life. And so, there was a time where somebody saw something in me, invested in me, and then, threw me to the proverbial fire when I was freezing, and that warmed me up for sure. So I think that's an example of somebody seeing something in me and then ultimately helping me through that process that it was totally outside of the scope of what I typically had done.
Very good. Very good. Investing in others in order to leave a legacy of purpose after you're gone, which seems counterintuitive. You'd think I'm investing in ways in myself, right, to enrich myself. But we're really enriching others here.
Right. And the key is that legacy that endures is always when it's for someone else. Right. And let's again follow the investment. Let's say literally you're the Walton family and if you put all their resources together, you would, see that they're still the most affluent family in America. However, that will begin to fade and taper. Right? At some point, all the money is spent. It's all used, no matter what the endowments are. But nobody talks about the Walton family. They still talk about Sam Walton. And he's been gone for decades. Why? Because he changed a lot of people's lives. He changed all the employees that were there and everything else. So the legacy, we get so fixated on legacy being a quantifiable number and not a life to live. And I heard it said one way, and I really liked this. It said, instead of providing a living, teaching someone how to live. We are so concerned about setting the next generation, providing a living, meaning giving them financial resources and teaching them instead of teaching them the principles to live a good life. Yeah. Right. So we don't want to provide a good life. We want to teach a good life. And I think that is a legacy that endures. Right. If we look back at the things that we carry from our family and generations preceding us, it is always the lessons that were taught, not the money that was given.
Right.
And that is the powerful thing in a legacy. And we have to make sure we're making that investment and we're doing so with a character and a future and a reinvestment. And that'll be the legacy that endures.
Well, we come to the end of our time. I think the big takeaway for me, anyway, is that we don't want to just be good providers, just provide a life, but teach people how to live. Teach people how to use this life to leave a legacy. And it's never too early to think about legacy, right? Because tomorrow's not promised to us. Well, thank you very much, listeners. Thank you, Reed, for sharing with us. Next time, we're going to continue with our final series of episodes for season 1, focused on a legacy of purpose. We will talk about finding alignment with others. Important, sort of harmony, right? Good. Until then, I'm Art Calderon. Be purposeful.
Listener, you will have a legacy. You either get to define it by your choices and living a purpose, or it will be defined by default. I challenge you today. What do you want your legacy to be? Will you invest in others? Or are you trying to get rich? Are you going to enrich or be rich? Decide today. Once you decide, change your habits. Once you change your habits, operationalize them, and truly, you also will have a legacy on purpose by investing in others. And I look forward to celebrating that with you.